For today's main activity, we are going to apply what we learned yesterday to some different scenarios today where we're talking about a negative number times a negative number. So just as a reminder, you will see this word velocity in this first problem here. Remember, velocity is the speed. So 3 miles per hour is a velocity. But sometimes you will see it as negative. It doesn't necessarily mean they're slowing down. When we're talking about velocity, it means going west or east. So remember, just like it was yesterday, negative is always west and a positive is always east. Okay, so yesterday you guys learned that a positive times a positive is always going to equal a positive. So something that you guys should have known already because that's what you've been working with since you learned about multiplying numbers. But yesterday we also learned that if we did a negative times a positive, we're going to end up with a negative answer. Okay. The example they gave is with a car. The car was moving west, let's say -5 miles per hour or -5 miles per minute for 1 minute. Well, then it's going to still end up west. It's not going to turn around. It's still going to end up negative. So that was the other one we learned. Today we're going to learn what happens when you do a negative times a negative. So let's go ahead and look at today's main problem. Okay, so we have a car and we have a table that's actually already filled in for us. And this is the times for one car. Okay, so the first thing we want to know is what direction is the car traveling? Okay, is it traveling east or west? Remember from my last one, negative is west, positive is east. Okay, also, what is its velocity? What's its speed for 1 second? So how fast is it going in 1 second? What does it mean when the time is 0? And most importantly, what could it mean to have a negative time? So here you should see that, hey, these are negative numbers. So think about it. If it's at 0, that's where it started. So if it's a -1, then that would be, then that would be 1 second before it reached the time it started. So 1 second before, it was 60 feet before 0. 2 seconds before was 120 feet. 3 seconds before was 180 feet. And we're talking about negative here, so that means it's west, and that means it's going towards the east. So you're going to answer these questions and type in your answers. So keeping that in mind, you guys are going to complete this table here. We'll work on one so that you have an idea of how this is going to work. Okay, so we know 0 is the starting place. Okay, 0 is where they're starting. And we know from reading that it's traveling -50 feet per second. And remember, that doesn't mean it's slowing down. Negative just simply means that it is going, according to our table here, negative means it's going west. Okay, so it's going west 50 feet per second. So I'm going to even put west here so I remember. W for west. So it's moving west 50 feet per second. Okay, so after 1 second, it was west 50 feet. 2 seconds, it was west 100 feet. Okay, so if we think before that starting point, before that camera, 1 second before, is it going to be east or west of the camera? Well, in this case, it's going to be east of the camera because after 1 second, it's west, 2 seconds, it's west, and it's going to keep going west. But before it reached west, it had to have been east of the camera. Okay, so it had to be east of the camera, so we know that is a negative. All right. Oh, excuse me, that's a positive. So positive, okay? So if we think about it, at 1 second, we know it's 50 feet for every second. So at 1 second, it's going to be 50. And we know it's east, so we know it's a positive 50 feet. So if we think about this then, we are saying that -50 times a a time of -1 is actually going to give us positive 50. So I want you to think about that as you complete the rest of these. Think about 2 seconds before it reaches 0. It should be going east. What's its spot? So think about what your numbers are going to end up being. That leads us into our question number 3. Question number 3, you're going to apply that same exact knowledge that we just worked on to fill in the rest of these, okay? So some of these should be pretty easy because we've actually already done similar questions, okay? So it's moving -20 meters per second, mean it's moving west 20 meters per second for 30 seconds, okay? So we knew it's moving west in groups of 20 times. We want it to be 30 seconds after it reached that 0. So 30 seconds after. So we have -20 times positive 30, which we know a negative times a positive, it's going to be -600. And if we think about it too, think about this problem here. If it's going west 20, it's going to keep going west after it reaches that 0 point. Okay. But if you notice, we're going to get down here to a negative and a negative, where we're dealing with, hey, the car is going west 35 meters per second, but I want to know before it reached that 0, 20 seconds before it reached that 0, where was that car? So before it reached 0, before it reached west, it's going to be east. So it's going to be the opposite. Okay. So think about that. Think about your last problems when trying to figure it out. After you have completed this one, I want you to answer these questions. Answer the questions. If we multiply a negative times a positive, what's our result going to be? And if we multiply two negative numbers, what's our result going to be? Okay. And after you're done with that, you'll check your work and then complete activity 3, where it's a very similar situation to the previous activity. So we know it's traveling -32 meters per second. That means it's traveling west 32 meters. So it's traveling west 32 meters. So at 1 second, it's at 1 second, it's at -32. At 2 seconds, it's at -64, so on and so forth. But I want to know going backwards. So what about 1 second before it was west? So 1 second before it was west, it was east. So that means it would be positive 32. So I want you to answer those. And then I want you to answer the question, I want to know, where was the car at -3 seconds? Okay, so use what you had learned in the previous activity that, hey, what happens when you multiply a negative and a negative to get your answer? And then also I want to know, where was the car at 6.5 seconds? So use what you know about a negative times a positive to get your answer. And then after you're done, I want you to go through and check your work.